We welcome you all for the sharing by Lopamudra. We are really very, very happy to have our second session, this one. And many of you might be knowing that she is an Almuni student from Ashram, SIAR. And then she went to US for her work and more studies for many years. Now she is back here in Pondicherry. She is a teacher in the ashram school, in Indian culture and also spirituality. She's a psychologist and a counselor. And she's also a writer of many books. So today she's going to speak about the influence of West on India.
I'm seeing some new faces, so I'll just say two words about what we are doing here. So we are studying Sri Aurobindo's Foundations of Indian Culture, not the text, but the idea of what the foundations are. And as we talked last time, that there are a series of essays he had written in the Arya from 1918 to 1920, so during the war. So he has addressed something called the attack on Indian civilization. I'm using that word deliberately because at that time India was, of course, deeply colonized. It's the early 1900s. We are halfway through the colonized period, a little more than halfway, and Indian civilization is at its lowest, which is why India was conquered to start with. And he is trying to awaken the Indian spirit, cultural, spiritual, political, all sorts of spirit. He's trying to encourage that. And for that, he needs to use a little bit of a strong language. So he's written in his magazines of those years. His language is strong and it is critical of the West and the influence of West, and specifically the criticism of the West leveled against India. And he's not alone in this, because there is a sort of awakening that's happening in the global South, all the countries that were colonized. And he's part of this conversation that now we call post-colonial scholarship. So he was a very early post-colonial scholar. So in that context, he wrote the book, Foundations of Indian Culture. But today, things have changed. So we're going to talk about what we have today, the contributions we see that we have got from the West, and what has India done with that contribution, and also how Indians have influenced through their spirituality, culture, in whichever form, the West. It has been a very rich encounter, and it started from the Silk Roads. It's a very ancient encounter. And at that time, during the Silk Road, which we are talking about like 2000 BCE, there was this highway which is called the Silk Road because silk was one of the important products that was being traded in this road. But there was spice that was being traded, and India, Indonesia, Malaysia, these were very big places where spice was grown. And alongside material products, there was this mental products that were getting traded. So things like Indian mathematics, astrology, astronomy was going to the West, and India was getting a lot of ideas from the West. So the encounter is not new, but it came in full on, like full throttle, around the period when India got colonized by the British. So India also had pockets of being colonized by the Portuguese, French, Dutch, but it's only when the British came that it really became a colonized nation, and the exchange started. So through my slides, I'm going to first give you a little history of India-Britain relationship. An epochal event happened in 1835, which is still the company, the British East India Company is ruling India. It's still not the crown. But it didn't matter, because the crown also ruled through the company and through the project of merchandise. It wasn't really the white man's burden to educate the global South. It was more about how to take advantage of the gifts of nature, the raw materials and the people's services from the global South. So the first thing that was done to India. And when I speak of India, it's a lot of these countries that were colonized, was that their indigenous systems were removed. So it started with the education system that India had. So no funding was given, sorry, no funding was given to vernaculars. So hundreds of languages that India had for Indian dance, classical dance, music. So musicians didn't have patronage, so they had to find their own small rajas and principalities. So there was a diaspora and also a loss. Cottage industries were not funded. So a lot of cottage industries, handicrafts went out of business and they do not exist anymore. I would think some languages also do not exist. And the Indian way of thinking, the academic style of thinking, that intuition first before the rational process, that too went unnoticed, or it went under the rugs. It was not encouraged, not sponsored. And what was really sponsored was teaching the language, English. Not teaching thinking, but teaching the language, because what the colonial masters needed was good clerks who wouldn't ask questions but would be good followers. So ever since the concept or the habit, the Indian habit of being good followers started. So that's what we call the Babu culture. Here's the Babu culture started. Of course, it's a derogatory term. It's those who followed the British call themselves Babus, which means like the upper class. But that sort of upper class who had money, because they were the ones that were getting the jobs from the British. But they were not Indians anymore. They were becoming a hybrid. And the nationalists like Aurobindo wanted to break this Babu culture. And not just Aurobindo, it started a long time back, that we have to come back to who we are. We have to first know who we are. We have to get out of the tamas. Tamas means ignorance, inertia, darkness that we have fallen into. Let's rediscover who we are. And that project is still on. We are still not, I do not think we have still rediscovered who we are. But we are not where we were 100 years back. So some other milestones is that, of course, Indian art was not sponsored like music. So Indian art was at its lowest. So we have arts like in the Ajanta and the Ellora caves. Those were forgotten. They were actually forgotten physically. They had become a forest land that no one remembered. But we had this fantastic art. So when they were rediscovered, again, by the British, a hunting party rediscovered them, and they said, oh, this too was in India. Then later on, people like Abanindranath Thakur, Nandalal Bose, they wanted to reclaim Indian art. So they got their inspiration from the cave paintings of Ajanta and Ellora. So they went back and they saw, okay, this was our art. And in between, we had a period of imitation art, because that's what we were taught in all the schools. Art was whatever the, the Western people taught us, and that too, we didn't get the best of the West, because only those few people who wanted to spend a hot year or two in India grudgingly came to India, so not the best of artists. They came and this is what they taught us. So it was very poor quality art. So there's this Raja Ravi Verma who started off with imitation art, and then he tried to bring back Indian art. He tried to reinstate it. At least his subject matter was Indian mythology, if not the portraiture and different ways of doing. And then the next, it's not that all people were like Macaulay who didn't want India to flourish. There were people who were really curious, and they came and they became big patrons of Indian culture. For example, William Jones. He learned Sanskrit. He set up the Asiatic Society, one of the most ancient institutions in Calcutta, which studies not just Indian art, Indian culture, Indian spirituality, but also of the influence of India in Southeast Asia, which is quite significant. And then there was Max Muller. He also studied the Vedas. He never came to India, but he had a lot of love for India, because the way he studied is heavily criticized at this age, because he started off with interpretations that were not enlightened, let's put it that way. So, but his intentions were out of goodwill for India. As a real scholar, he came as an Indologist. And then there were some Irish ladies like Sister Nivedita, Annie Besant, who came as revolutionaries because they were fighting the British in Ireland, and they transferred that love for freedom and love for getting out of British control to India, and they continued. They were the ones who started the Theosophical Society and also education for women. Like I said, India was going through a very low time, low period. So Sister Nivedita set up a school for women in Kolkata. So it's not all a bad story that we were just treated badly and raw materials were taken away from us. Nothing was given. I'll show you all the things that we got in the next slide. Then slowly, after the Second World War, it becomes more of a global north versus the global south, and the dollar becomes the standard. From the gold standard, we move to dollar. Of course, we can question why one country in the world has to become the standard. There's a whole history to it, and World Bank, International Monetary Fund, even the UN with its Security Council and the problematics that are related to it, they still have this sort of imperialism. It's not over, and people are aware of it. And that's why this whole thing about post-colonialism is even questioned. That why are we talking about post-colonialism? Because we are still colonized. We are still mentally colonized, economically colonized. It's happening in every war that's going on. For example, the current war in Ukraine. It has some shadow of colonization. It's the same kind of forces that are playing around. And some new sort of ideas or memes or tropes that have come up is Islamophobia, for example, which didn't exist till Second World War, even much later after the Second World War. But there are like new ways of this colonization or imperialism that's showing up. And Orientalism, it's still on. And what is the Orient doing or the East doing to answer Orientalism? So they are also writing literature, which is, for example, Occidentosis. So the toxicity of the West imposed on the East. So this is a book that's written by a scholar in Iran called Al-Jamal. So he has written this, how the East was made toxic or poisoned by the West. And then there's a movement in Africa called Negritude, like the black movement, that we were called Negro and it became a bad word, but we are going to embrace this bad word because yes, we are black and we are proud of being black. We have a very ancient culture, and these are the wonderful things that were suppressed. Now we want to break away from the suppression, bring it to the forefront, and be proud about it. And then the Third World Project. It started with the non-aligned movement during the Cold War and sort of fizzled out politically. But people like Vijay Prasad, and these are historians, post-colonial historians, who are very active right now. So they are scholars, historians, and activists who say that we have to revive this project, that the third world, the global south, or ex-colonies have to come together and we have to help each other to get back on our feet. All the resources that were depleted, the economic draining that's still happening, and also the pride that we lost in our own culture. So let's help each other get it back. So that's a project also that's working out right now. Here are some names. These are Indians. And there are some. Frantz Fanon, for example, was active during the Negritude project. Paulo Freire is from Brazil. He's trying to redefine education, the indigenous way, like Aurobindo did when he was working on the National Education Project. Then this person, Jalal al-Ahmad, is the one who wrote Occidentosis. It's a Persian book, but again. So this is a very quick history of the whole East-West encounter. Now the things that India got from the West. So like I said, there was a there was an over-influence of the Advaita philosophy around the period that India is losing control of its politics. And small kingdoms are fighting each other. And it's a ripe time for a bigger power, an external power that's well organized and has weapons to come and take over the country. And they're very easily taking over the country because people really at some point are justifying it as though this is all illusion. We don't really need to care much about this world. There's this other world. So what is this other world? Oh, this world of plenitude that's going to be the reward. Whatever you do in life is karma and it's a binding. So think of moksha or liberation. So that thought, what it does to you is that saps your life energy. That's what happened to India for some period of time. For 1,000 years, India was primarily Buddhist. So as you know, that Buddhism relies a lot about the other world, thinks about the other world, and nirvana is a big aim. So what about this world? It's an illusion. You don't really have to care much about it. So what about conquering other countries? Oh, that's a far-off plan. Forget it. You just conquer your difficulties. So coming from that mindset, nothing wrong about it, but it creates a nation of weakness. It created tamas. Everyone is not ready for this kind of leaving life and walking off into the forest with energy. So a lot of people just rode on this wave and became, in other words, lazy. So that laziness was exploited, and India is learning this slowly from the West again. That look, we can pay attention to our clothes, our language, everything that is about the life, the world. Let's pay attention to it because these people have paid attention. They've made wonderful weapons. They've made wonderful ships with weapons on them so they could conquer us. And they have conquered China and they have conquered Indochina. So how come they did it and we couldn't do it? All of us here in Asia, we just lay down, prostrate at their feet because they had something. And then India is learning that, yes, we should pay attention to the material world also. So all these things like habits, the etiquette of wearing clothes, the right kind of clothes, keeping things clean, even things like eating on plate with spoons and forks and knives. So we are learning all these different kinds of etiquette that the West is teaching us. And with that, we are learning their language. We are learning English. And like in Pondicherry, people have learned French. And what it gives you is their literature. And from literature, you get their perspective on life. And you get that vital energy back. So people like Ram Mohan Roy, for example, in the early days of colonization, and also Syed Ahmad Khan. There are two people in two different communities. Ram Mohan Roy was in the Hindu community and Syed Ahmad Khan was in the Muslim community. Both of them said, look at Western education. It teaches them practicality. They can make machines. We are not being able to make machines. With machines, they are being able to make clothes 6 times faster than we are. So our handloom industry is getting defunct because they are doing better. So we should also learn Western techniques. So they start introducing Western education, especially science education, in the education system. And then they say, no, we have to revamp our whole system of thinking. So Ram Mohan Roy says, I am going to create a new spirituality. And he calls it the Brahmo Samaj, which is heavily influenced by the West. Western education, Western ideas, the one God, the mass movement of going to one place, praying together. India was very individualistic. You choose when you pray, where you pray, you choose your God. But here he's sort of herding people together and to do something together. So he created some educational institutions. Syed Ahmad Khan created a very big institution for the Muslims. So he helped his community, the Muslim community, to bring in education. And these people faced a lot of opposition in their own country. The Indians didn't want to change. So there were fatwas against Syed Ahmad Khan. Like fatwas means these are like pronouncements by the priests or the head of the religion that this man should be treated as an outcast. Do not talk to him. Don't go to his schools. But people didn't listen to the fatwas because they saw advantage in going to those schools. And similarly for Ram Mohan Roy, he fought a lot of time. He's fighting the Brahmins in his own society, trying to tell them that some of your practices are really decadent, like the sati, practice of sati, widow remarriage. Look how you treat the widows. It's inhuman. So the ideas of enlightenment, which is equality for all, humanity for all, that's percolating in such systems as Brahmo Samaj. So these are the new ideas that's coming to India. Democracy, for example. India was very hierarchical at that point. First of all, there's the caste. In the family also, someone has the greater say than others. So there's a pecking order. And here we are getting an idea that each man one vote. Everyone is equal. So the idea of democracy, which also gives you the freedom of speech and the freedom to ask for your rights. It's absolutely revolutionary ideas for the Indian society, which was a collective society, very much dependent on the elders' word. So all those things are getting broken down and new ideas are coming, which is wonderful ideas. Because there was a time when India was ruled by superstitions. And it was very hurtful towards most of the communities, most of the people. Women, for example, had no voice. And whenever there's something wrong happening in the family, it's blamed on certain people and irrationally blamed. This new bride who comes home, it's because of her that all these people are getting sick. And it's very hurtful and unfair, unjust. It hurts human rights. So slowly human rights is awakening in the Indian society. Again, thanks to all those ideas that we are reading. The philosophers of the West, the French Revolution philosophers are being translated or they're being read in their original language. And then business also. Indian business was very person to person, personalized business. Like it's your friend, so you give him at a lower rate. And so you have to build associations, create connections. There was no concept of a bank, a faceless bank. That is, again, equal towards all. So again, equality is being reinforced in several aspects of life. So in banking, and then the thing that so many people can contribute a little bit for one venture. So it doesn't always have to be the rich capitalist who is doing a new venture. It could be just someone with a great idea. And he gets hold of a lot of people who contribute just a little bit, and then he too has a chance in life. So there was this rags to riches story wasn't there at all. Like we hear, America was a story of rags to riches. But India didn't have that story. And here they're trying to take that concept and let's give a chance to someone who really merits it, and not just the son who has inherited his father's property. There's something wrong about inheriting and something great about entrepreneurial encouragement. So that started coming in. And with it, also legal bindings. There was no question of legality. It was whatever you believe. You have a witness and you say this land belongs to me, and the witness has agreed to it. And you go back to this witness and the witness says this. But there's no paperwork. So at some point, the witness can be bought or sold, and the witness dies. So there's no record of who owns what land. It was very fluid. So all those things started getting codified, legalized. And of course, Indians lost a lot of land in this process because there was no land record. And the early days, the British just captured land and they made their own records and they said it belongs to me. And I can prove it to you in a court that the British set up. And the court sees this paperwork and doesn't believe the word of mouth of someone who had witnessed it. So in that process, a lot of land was lost. A lot of things were lost until the Indians also woke up to the fact that we need to get some rigor in our systems. So legal rigor, education system also some rigor. When you write a paper, academic paper, it can't be wishy-washy. It has to follow some sort of process. So in education, a lot of new ideas came in. And a lot of old ideas were thrown out. This is where the conversation of national education comes in. So what did we lose in this process? So India had this intuitive way of reaching truth, or the epistemology, or the whole structure of how do we know what we know? How do we understand truth? It's not just with the rational mind that we understand truth. We understand truth through experience, which is something that India had, and a lot of indigenous societies had. But they didn't have a very rigorous way of showing that that too is legitimate. So when they came, they were being weighed against the Western way, the scientific method, and the process, the rigorous process. They lost out. So it became just a rational way of approaching truth. Now, this truth with T capital resists that rational process. It's about the lower knowledge. You can do a lot with lower knowledge, but as soon as you want to apprehend higher knowledge, then you need a new apparatus. Just the rational mind is not enough. So it took some time for Indians to realize that we have lost precious material or precious methodologies in giving up everything and embracing the Western way of educating us. And the silos, like there is no subject like ecology, because we have biology and we have botany, but something that integrates a lot of sciences together, sociology, psychology, land reform, politics. It's for example, ecology is such a subject, but we don't have it because the Western way of looking at education silos it or divides it in a very well defined way. And ecology is too big to be defined or to be limited. So we lost these ways of being, which we had in the past. So from Sri Aurobindo's time or early 1900s, there were a lot, a lot of educators who said, let's think of what we can do to bring back national education. And unfortunately, that project didn't work out. So Sri Aurobindo came to Pondicherry and he started again this project that he has started, Sri Aurobindo Ashram International School, that Devasmitadi went to and that I went to. So they are also trying to bring back some sort of national education. It's still a work in progress. Then Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore was also part of the National Education Project. He also went off, he went to Shantiniketan in West Bengal, and he created his own university with his own principles of education, again, national education. Then there was Dayanand Saraswati, who went back to the Vedas, and he said, okay, how did we teach our students to connect with truth, to experience truth? So he got his own education system is based on the old style, the Vedic style, integrated with the modern ways. So at least there are three. And then there's Chinmayananda, Chinmaya Mission he has set up, Ramakrishna Mission. So right now there are a lot of different initiatives to reclaim Indian education. And at the national level, there is a new education policy that came out in 2020. So the NEP 2020, that's New Education Policy 2020, has actually researched Sri Aurobindo's ways of educating and different people who had, let's say, an ideal of national education. So they went back and they got a lot of those systems back. So what did they do? NEP, in short, broke the silos. They broke the classroom. So we didn't study in classrooms before. We used to actually go to nature and study nature. So let's do that. And what medium of instruction do we use? Do we use English? They said, let's break that. We use the local language because that's how children think. First, they connect best with the earth and they connect best with their language. So let's teach in local language. And let's teach subjects that are all mixtures of lots of subjects. Shall we have tests, which is also apparently a very Western idea, that you have tests and everything depends, your future depends on one test, class 12, what numbers you get for that 3 hours. Now, suppose you are having a cold in the 3 hours, mind is not clear, the rest of your future should not depend on those 3 hours. So again, we are breaking away from those high value tests or exams that's going to impact the rest of your life. And then thinking, we had stopped thinking, it was rote learning. Because, you don't need thinking clerks. Remember, we do not want you to think. We'd rather have you follow what we have thought out and you do it. You just execute. So again, so that way of allowing someone else to be your leader is getting broken. So we are teaching children to think. Even now, if you think of the projects or the monies that we get from World Bank and International Monetary Fund, it's not just the money we get, we also get the advisors from the West. Because they will say, okay, we know what's best for you, how best you can repay your loan. Is it going to be ecologically viable? Is it going to be long term? It's not their concern. They just want a short term project that you can pay back the loan. So, for example, the Green Revolution. So, I'll not get into it, but if you study what happened to the Green Revolution, it came as a package from the World Bank with the advisors, and it devastated all the lands where it was tried out. And now we know, so we're trying to now get back to our indigenous ways of collecting seed and planting, and whatever we knew in the past that worked is what we are reclaiming. Then there are other things that I said we were lacking, India was lacking, and a lot of colonized nations were lacking, was the vitality to get ahead. So what is success? Very simple. What is success for a Western person and what is success for Indians? So it's to achieve something above everyone else, to be the top person in terms of quantities. Like if you can earn the most amount of money, the most amount of papers you're producing in an academic environment, or most number of rewards you get, most number of students, most number of 5 stars. So it's all about quantities. And the Indian way of looking at things was about qualities. Even if you have that one student, but that is Krishna, the Lord Krishna who has come to you, you are the best teacher in the world. So that was a different yardstick to measure success. It was about how well you can progress while you're helping someone else. So it's about your inner progress, your journey in this life, knowing that this life is just a small bit of a string of lives you will have. So the whole perspective changes. It's not just about this particular life that you have to be successful. You have to think of karma and how you achieve that success, how honestly you've achieved, because you're collecting deeds, good deeds, karma. So the concept of looking at life was very different. How much you should apply in life. Should you or should you not fight? There's a whole book, Gita, which is one of our foundational texts. The whole thing is just asking one question: should you or should you not fight? And it takes 18 chapters with such a lot of background to convince a fighter, a born fighter, that yes, you should fight. Even he wasn't convinced. So we were at that level, and when the West came, they showed us how to work hard. We started learning, relearning perhaps, but it's a great contribution to be rooted in the material world and not float. Now, to be rooted, it's not enough. You should also be connected to the other world. So there is a tendency that you're so well rooted that you forget that there's the other world. And that's, again, one of those drawbacks that has happened in India, and it's still happening to a lot of people. That they've become so materialistic that that's it. That's the end all of life. There isn't anything beyond. The scientific temper is something we learned. I discussed with you is the rigor, the method, the step-by-step way of proving that something exists. To even question, how do I know what I know? Is it just a fluid way of knowing and I jumped to this conclusion? Is it just a superstition? Or did I believe someone I revere? Or really I should question, is this true? So that enquiry, the process of enquiry that wasn't there, came back. Because we had these wonderful role models who asked questions, like William James, that your spirituality is wonderful, I can connect to it, but can I get some detailed steps in between? Because what if someone else wants to connect to it? How do they go about it? So a lot of books were written on Indology, and slowly Indian yoga, Indian spirituality started spreading in the world because of English. English language, translated it, and it's the language, some people call it globish. It's a global language. It's not English anymore because so many people know it. And they know it perhaps because of the colonization of Britain. But in any case, it has become a language that is the lingua franca of humanity. And we read books in that language, so we have to also translate our vernacular. It doesn't tell you that do not write stories in your own local language. It in fact tells you to write it because that's how you connect best with your culture, with your heritage. But it also says, oh, we should have a whole crop of translators, because how will the world also get the benefits of what you have experienced? So this exchange, the cultural exchange that has started from that colonial period is still going on, and it's very active. So there's a huge number of Indian authors who are writing in English. Maybe they are writing in other languages also, but there's a whole lot who are also getting translated in English. So here are some psychological contrasts. We'll go through it quickly. We don't have to really dwell deep into it. For one reason is that it may not be true for all. When we make such cultural essentializations, it's not true for most or a lot of the population. So, for example, the West is extraverted and the East is introverted. We cannot say it's true for a lot of people. Maybe there's a tendency of being introverted because of the emphasis was on individuals' progress towards the divine. So it needs you to be alone, meditate on your own growth. So it makes you introverted. Whereas if you are thinking of new machines, new ways of making life more enjoyable, livable, then you will be extroverted. So quickly we are going through it. I'm not saying that this is like written in stone, but there are some observations that a lot of post-colonial scholars have made. Then also the Indian way of being was more collective. Like if you have to take a decision, you ask everybody around you, should I marry this person? Everyone's opinion is needed for you to be able to marry. It's not something that the West would do. Like, I have chosen this person, it's nobody's business to tell it's wrong. If I made a mistake, I'll find out. So this idea of the individual and collective used to be there at some point. Again, this too is breaking. Indians wouldn't now ask everyone. So this is my life, I'm going to decide for myself. So that's why the nuclear family has broken. Literally living together in one building has broken, and also going to your family to get their blessings, that should I do something, this venture I'm starting. You don't need anyone's blessings. You may need the blessings of their purse. In that case, you have to negotiate. But for your personal life, you draw the boundary. You say, this is what it is. So these are some things that are, I would call, progressive elements that India has got from the West. And again, the scientific way of thinking versus the intuitive. Scientific way of thinking has its limitations, but think of the infra-rational state where superstition is ruling our life. So we are much better off with the scientific way of thinking than that infra-rational. So at some point, we have to also break free from the scientific way and find another method that works for truth. For example, the intuitive way. So it's been said that the Indian tradition is ahistorical. Like, we didn't care about timelines because of the cyclical nature of events. We know the 4 yugas repeat. Within the 4 yugas, many things keep repeating, like the ebb and flow of culture. There are high points of culture and low points of culture. Again, high points and low points. It's like depressions, recessions, and boom will keep happening. So that knowledge of the cycle of life exists. So is it really important to know in which cycle some event happened? Note it down. It happened in 951 BCE. So all these details were missing from Indian ways of noting down history. So that's why there's a lot of ambiguity right now as to When were the Vedas written? When was the Indus Valley civilization? When did the Aryans migrate? Oh, did they migrate? So there's a lot of controversy and um, finger pointing, and it's a field where India is trying to fill the gaps. And at the same time, some scholars say, do we really need to fill the gaps? Do we need to be precise? Because that itself is a Western lens of looking at timelines. We don't need to be precise. In fact, in human stories, there is no precise date when something happens. There is a thought that gets incubated in someone's mind, maybe decades before the thing actually happens. So would you say that event has happened when the thing happens, or when the first thinker imagined it and dreamed it? So that's another point where mm, there are contentions, and the debate is on, and maybe it'll be on for some people who need precision, and some people who don't. They say, this is not something, it's not my battle, I'll move on. And then this is again something they say, that the West likes order and the East likes chaos. Look at the traffic. You have an example of what chaos and order is. Again, I wouldn't say it's always true that Indians are very comfortable with chaos. Some authors have said it's very comfortable with chaos. It's not comfort, it's just that there was no alternative. So I'll leave this aside. Yeah, I wouldn't, I'm not such an Orientalist or Occidentalist. I'm not going to say that we have, a lot of these things, psychological contrasts, are human nature and not Western nature or Eastern nature. They say that why didn't the East or Indians, why didn't they go out conquering the world? India could have also been a big imperial power, but only those 5 countries of Europe did it. So what did they have different? Are they genetically different? Are they ethnically different? Are they different kinds of species? So there is that debate. And if you look below the surface, at least when I look below the surface, I just see it as lack of opportunity. Like some say, virtue is lack of opportunity. So a lot of opportunities got created in small countries like Netherlands. They were so small, and they needed more space to explore. So that's why they went exploring, whereas India was so huge. It was so easy to just travel. You didn't need visas. You could just go from kingdom to kingdom. So you didn't have that sense of being cramped by your walls and doors. So the sense of having to explore, conquer another land didn't exist. So there are all these things that are part of which geography you belong to, and the same human put in a different geography may have reacted differently. So I wouldn't go down to say that there is something inherently very different in the Western person and Eastern person. It's a different story. And this thing about one God and many gods. It's not very fixed also, because in India, we have many representations, but people say, but there's still one God. You call him Ishvara or Brahman. Sometimes he doesn't even have a form, he or she, Tat, doesn't have a form. So how different are they from the monotheists, where Allah has no form? No different. Allah also has 99 names from his qualities. So here Indian gods also have qualities, and each of these qualities are represented as different forms, like Shiva, Vishnu, Kali, Durga. So is it really different? If you want to really split hair, maybe there is some difference at the superficial level, how you worship and this and that. But at the bottom of it, each of us chooses what works for us. If that one God works, and if you are not being able to deal with multiple qualities of that one God, you will choose that one Nirguna Brahman. If you can deal with the qualities, you'll choose that Brahman with several qualities, so Saguna Brahman. If you can deal with lots of representations, then you'll choose idol worship. You're free to do what you like. So there is no real conflict here. It's just an observation that some cultures have tended to be monotheists and some cultures have tended to be polytheists. So here's something again, during the decadent period of India, like I said, Indian society was very hierarchical. So they went with duties and entitlement. Like the older people are entitled to more, those who belong to a certain caste are entitled to more, instead of thinking of equality. And if you merit, that means you have proven with your work, deeds, your acumen, your intelligence, you have proven that you are capable of respect, you get it. So the West came with that idea that if you can prove yourself to be capable, then you will be respected in society. Whereas in India, the idea was if you have reached a certain seniority, if you have inherited, if you are rich, if you are this, that, if you are from a certain caste, then you automatically get reverence. You don't have to prove it. You can be actually performing or acting out the reverse of what you ought to be doing, but still you'll get, by default, you'll get the reverence or entitlement. This is related to the previous about entitlement. So arhat, we discussed last time, is like what you deserve. And rights is what your rights are depending on birth, financial capacity, various capacities. These are your rights given to you, which are all artificial. And arhat is what you have earned. Then about relationships, especially man-woman relationship, marriage relationship, love relationship, it was very subdued in India. So you do not show it. The PDA, they call it, right? Public display of affection. There was no PDA in India. That's in short, they say. That's why there's this Valentine's Day squadron. So they come and break couples who are doing PDA. Those who are not current with the Indian ways that are happening, all fun stuff's happening in India. So these are things that they are trying to break, and these couples say that there's a need to express love, and if we have no private place, then we'll do it in a park. It happens to be a public park. We are expressing love for each other. You also do it. So there's a lot of debate around it. But the fact is that for generations, it was suppressed. Showing that you have affection for someone else in public was not allowed or not the right way to behave in society. So husbands and wives also never walk together. There's a husband walking in front and husband trailing. So all these funny things, they don't exchange any word of endearment. So there was a facade in public, and there's a different way of behaving at home, which is why there were schools, schools for boys and schools for girls, and they don't talk to each other. Girls and boys don't talk to each other until the day they get married. So you can imagine, a human nervous system is not geared for this sort of segregation. At the age of 18, it cannot deal with the segregation. So there's a lot of violence that it comes out, and it comes out through pathologies. If there's a lot of suppression of your ways to show love, it becomes pathological and it becomes a disease. And Indian society has suffered for a long time. It still is. It hasn't really found a solution. And in the West also, the solution to go all out and overdo it is also not the solution. So India has to assimilate from the West, but judiciously assimilate. And the West also has to assimilate from the East, but again, judiciously. How much you're going to take? So if you are given the freedom yourself, you have to choose. Society doesn't have to come and tell you, this is a rule book, this is how far you can go. So some enlightened parents already tell the child, you know what is good for you, you decide. But I trust you. So you place the trust on the child, and that's a big responsibility. I talked about materialism. So the idea was that India is not materialistic, the West is materialistic, India is spiritual. But right now, is India spiritual? If India was spiritual, there wouldn't be such a polarization. There wouldn't be this 1 or 2% of people who are so rich that they own planes, and 80% of the people are so poor that they can't afford 2 meals. There wouldn't be this disparity in the material field if India wasn't materialistic. So there is a lot of materialism in India. There isn't so much sharing. There would be more sharing if people thought of spiritual values, or they tried to enact those values in life. So when Sri Aurobindo wrote about materialism and spirituality, he wrote about the tendencies that existed in the idealist and in the West. But it's not what really exists right now in India. So whenever you read a text that's written so many years ago, always compare with what is right now, and then realize that it's dated, it has a place in time, and then you can always get something that's eternal from those texts. So the social commentary may be dated, not true now, but there's a lot of eternal values in Sri Aurobindo's writings. So the Foundations is such a text that there is a lot of eternal values in it, and there are things that are dated. So you decide for yourself when you do read this book. Okay, we talked about drive to live, to inquire, wrong spelling, and to revise things. So that idea about revising things also, you may have heard that it's always been done. So this trope was there in India that we don't want to change things because it's always been done. But don't you want to question that what's always been done, is it still good for the modern person? And even was it good even for the past? Just because it was always been done doesn't mean it should always be done. So just the openness to question. That openness didn't really exist. That's why I've put it on this slide. It has come at this point, but there's still a battle, a generational battle. Some children still have to fight with their grandparents or parents also saying that just because you have done it and it worked for you doesn't mean it should work for me. And maybe there's a better way to do things. Yours was good enough, but I can do something better. This is in politics, especially the way of ruling. India had the Panchayat Raj, means every village had its own way of dealing with the people. So there were, in small scale, a small number of people knew how to look after each other. But as soon as that multiplied with a lot of people, a huge country, or even a huge state, that structure was breaking down. So the idea of centralization started taking over. So by the time India first got her government in 1947, Nehru had this plan to centralize. And Gandhi's idea was to decentralize. So there were two different paradigms in India. India had a choice. But as you know, Gandhi didn't survive more than a year after. About a year later, he was assassinated. So his idea of giving power to the people at the grassroots level in every village didn't work out. To make every village self-sufficient wasn't followed, and Nehru centralized all the institutions. So there'll be one board, central board of education, central board of agriculture, central board of this, that. So, and everything came out of that center. So Delhi again became the center of power. And when you have such centralization, then there is always the branches and roots are atrophying because it's too far from the center. They're not getting attention enough. So we have a big Northeast problem. We have problems in the fringes of the country. Northeast in the fringe. So they don't get enough attention because of centralization. Kashmir is a problem. Punjab was a problem for a long time. The South is a problem. They're very far from the center. And the hegemony of the center, which is you have to learn Hindi, you have to follow what the central government says. Those structures were resisted by the state governments. And this is still a problem. It's still being debated. And some people like centralization, industrialization. Some people like cottage industries. So there will be a difference. There's a 12-minute short film that Satyajit Ray did. It's called Two. And it has no words. It has just music. And in a very beautiful and short way, he has shown the difference between the East and West. It's a very crafty movie. It's like people say there hasn't been a shorter way of conveying message. It says many things in this short film. Do you want to comment on it? Yes, it's very powerful, and why he's called it two. What are these two different paradigms? You can say the indigenous, that's free. The boy who's outside, he's poor. He couldn't be conquered using indigenous technology, that slingshot. He couldn't, but then he used the gun to defeat this person. But then he shot back with that flute at the end. He's being able to play the flute, and this rich boy knows that he couldn't really conquer. He's gone back to his first trade. He started off, this poor boy started off by playing the flute, and then he tried a few things competing with the rich boy, and perhaps he couldn't compete. But what he has is that inherent skill which he picked up, and that's what worked. And at the end, all these toys are not going to satisfy. It satiates him, but he realizes that there's something missing. The gun is a toy, those robots is a toy, and various toys like the fridge, the balloon, the matchbox, everything is toy of technology that he has. But what is his inherent skill that will keep him going?
The last picture with the bar of the window.
Yes.
And that robot, which, because I guess this is an old movie, still that robot is so symbolic also of this new era.
Yes, the robot plays such a big role in the new world. Yes.
It's like visionary, no?
It is visionary, and he has used a lot of subtlety in making this. All the images, if you noticed at one point he was chewing a gum that the boy takes and sticks it somewhere. The thing is, what is chewing gum? Again, it's an import. And the act of chewing something and mindlessly sticking it in a place and not putting it in the dustbin. And this habit that this rich boy has got, that he will do what he likes, someone else will come clean after him, or he sort of desecrates the place by putting something that he was eating down there without thinking. It's a mindless act of just sticking, and this is what we see all around, a mindless act of taking something out of your mouth and putting it somewhere. He just, for 2 seconds he shows that, but then we can talk about that itself. Like, what does it mean to do such a mindless thing? What does it mean to wear a Mickey Mouse cap? That too has a message. And the mustache. Everything, there's such a lot of message packed in this. And then if you follow the score, the musical score, which we know he used to do his own, he kept it completely silent when the boy was aiming the gun at the kite. So the music prompts us to feel a few things. He doesn't want to give us a prompt at that point. It's just that, let's see what happens. And this is what happened. We hear the gunshot very clearly, and it's a sure shot. This is how India was colonized, was conquered, with the gun that we didn't have. We were probably playing with the slingshot. On that bow and arrow that this boy had, it's not comparable to the... so when you are comparing at that level, at the material level, we lost out. China lost out. Japan lost out. There's so many countries that lost out until they woke up to the fact that we cannot ignore material prosperity. That too is important. We cannot forget what we had, the higher wealth or the spiritual wealth, but this too is important. We have not given it any importance for so many 1,000 years, and we are suffering because of that. And the conquest hasn't been just a loss of a few things, it has been a draining of India's wealth. So before the conquest, India had a share of 23% of the world GDP, and after the conquest, 1945, it had 2% of the world's GDP, and it was depleted. There was very little left in the people, in the technologies, and in material resources. So slowly we had to recultivate, rebuild it. So it's been a very big devastation, the encounter with the West.
It seems to me that the kid, which is with the gun, is also an Indian boy, no?
He is an Indian boy.
So
yes.
also shows not only a shock of culture, but inside the same culture,
Yes.
the difference of thought,
Yes.
of approach of life.
Yes, and
all that.
which is what is visionary. This was in 1962 made, which is right now a lot of this conversation of how much of the West are we to assimilate, how to assimilate. So all this conversation is already there in this film. This rich boy drinking Coca-Cola from a bottle. It starts off right from the beginning. All the trappings that he has, including being in the house without a free tool, like the kite is freedom. It has a whole space that it can play in, and this boy doesn't have such a free tool. He loses out with the kite, but then he wins with the gun. So there's this one-upmanship happening all the time, and at the end, there's a realization that there is an inherent value in being able to create your own music with your own tools. That bamboo flute would have perhaps been made by this child or his family, and he is able to satisfy himself with that little flute, whereas so many toys together is not being able to satisfy the apple, the drink, the balloons. He's still lonely, he's still alone, he's trying to find out how to entertain himself.
The expression also of the two boys.
Yes.
The one which is in the field, which has never an expression, physical manifestation of angriness or anything. While the other boy, it shows, so it's well filmed, really.
Yeah. And then he pulls out his tongue when he has won. He's won against, he's shot the thing, and he thinks it's the end of the game.
The other one, very placid, very quiet.
Yeah, the other one's face was placid and quiet. And a director like Rai, he would have thought of that millisecond, how those two children, he would have trained them to show the expressions. Nothing is random. He's calculated, and he has packed a lot of meaning in this movie. It's so apt for this subject.
Maybe if we have time another week, see it again.
You want to see it again? It's available on the internet. So I'll send the link to Devasmitadi, yes. In fact, it's worth watching again and again and getting all the nuances out of it and studying it. Again, not from a judgmental perspective. It's just comparative study for all cultures to know that all cultures had something very deep. It's not that the West started off being materialist. And because they have excelled so well in materialism, that's all they have. Every culture has a very deep aspect. That each one has to go and do that introspection and find a balance between these aspects of life.
In Western country, it depends of the, how you say, if you are a rich family or poor family. Even now, when I was a child, if my family was poor, I didn't have all this luxury. And I mean, I am not 200 years old also, no? So what I mean is, it's not only cultural, it's not one civilization, one culture, it is on human level.
It is human nature.
Human nature, human level,
Yeah. We as humanity, all these, when we do a comparative study or we watch these films, it shows us more about, these are satires on human nature. It's not really about the fight between East and West, and it's not Orientalism anymore or Occidentosis. That fight's over. It's to take it forward as human beings. We have so many imperfections, and we are hybrid products of all these cultures now. No one is a pure Eastern, no one is a pure Western. And if they are trying to be, they tend to become fundamentalists. So we want to leave fundamentalism aside, and we want to progress as humans. And if things, some of these trappings come in the way, like religion, we want to transcend, transform, become spiritual people, and leave those things aside. Because all these things have taught us lessons. The whole colonization has taught us a lot of lessons. So we are here to learn from them and not to go back, critique, and again think of how to get back at them, how do we take revenge. It's moot point. The people who had come and fought are not there. Their grandchildren also perhaps are not there. The next generation is here. And we are also great-grandchildren of those who fought. We are in a different world, and I think it is pointless to go back and demand justice. But right now, when we say injustice, this is where we have to take action.